1985. Embu das Artes, Brazil. Shovels cut into the red earth. A forensic team unearthed sun-bleached bones from a common grave. The name on the headstone reads Wolfgang Gerhardt. But the investigators suspect a different identity. These remains might belong to Josef Mengele. He was the angel of death of Auschwitz. For 40 years, the world hunted the man who turned medical science into systematic torture. Survivors remember the selections on the train platforms. They describe his cold eyes and the casual way he whistled while sending thousands to the gas chambers. His obsession was twins. He performed macabre experiments on children in the name of racial purity. How did the most wanted criminal on the planet live for decades in Brazil? It was a life of shadows and fake names. High-ranking networks provided cover. Local families looked the other way. The secret held for nearly half a century. But in reality, the mask was slipping. The forensic team worked slowly. They pulled fragments of a skull from the dirt. They laid out the ribs on a white sheet. They measured the femur. Every bone was a piece of a global puzzle. What did they find when they opened that coffin? The footage shows experts leaning over a table. They are looking for a specific dental record. They are looking for a fracture in the cheekbone. The tension in the laboratory is visible. Why did he choose South America? He had money and a network of former Nazis. But his luck was running out. Events accelerated. The world watched the evening news. Forensic technology was about to provide a final answer. There was no room for error. The identity of the remains would either close the case or spark a new manhunt. The investigation reached its peak. The evidence was conclusive. The man in the Brazilian grave was not Wolfgang Gerhardt. The angel of death had drowned in the ocean 6 years earlier. The story ended here. May 30th, 1943, the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau in occupied Poland. A train whistle screams in the distance. The metallic sound echoes through the heavy fog hanging over the camp complex. Cattle car doors slam open with a deafening crash. Hundreds of Hungarian Jews spill out onto the platform. They are exhausted and disoriented. Many do not know where they are. SS guards shove them into lines on the selection ramp. One man stands out among the SS officers. His uniform is perfectly pressed, his boots shine. He wears white gloves, his posture is stiff and ceremonial. Dr. Josef Mengele has just arrived to take his post as a medical officer at the Birkenau extermination camp. He carries an authority that goes beyond his official rank. Administrative SS records held at the Auschwitz State Museum confirm the date, May the 30th, 1943. This was the beginning. Who was Josef Mengele? At first glance, a brilliant academic. Brilliant. In reality, a killer in a white coat. He graduated from the University of Munich. He held doctorates in both physical anthropology and medicine. He represented the Nazi academic elite. He put science at the total service of racial ideology. To the prisoners, he appeared cold and professional. To the survivors, he was something far more sinister. The Nuremberg trial testimonies describe his behavior. Mengele walked the selection ramps like an actor on a stage. He moved his arms with theatrical elegance. A flick of the thumb to the left meant immediate death in the gas chambers. A flick to the right meant slow death through slave labor. He whistled classical music while deciding who lived and who died. But the selections were only the beginning. Captured medical records later revealed his true obsession. He wanted twins. Eva Moses Kor arrived at Auschwitz at age 10 with her sister Miriam. She provided an official testimony. She stated that Mengele examined them like laboratory rats. He told the children they had two fathers now, their biological parents and himself. He called himself Father Mengele. The data is clear. These children were not people to him. They were tools. He used them to try and prove pseudoscientific racial theories. Camp documents show that Mengele performed experiments on approximately 1,500 pairs of twins. Fewer than 200 survived his care. The experiments were graphic and brutal. The list of atrocities is long. He injected chemicals into children's eyes to change their color. He performed unnecessary amputations. He forced blood transfusions between twins with incompatible types. He deliberately infected healthy subjects with deadly diseases. He performed major surgeries without any anesthesia. He called this research. Dr. Miklos Naisli was a Jewish prisoner forced to work for Mengele. He wrote his memoirs in 1946. He witnessed the unthinkable. He saw Mengele dissect living twins to compare their internal organs side by side. He kept bodies preserved in formaldehyde. He labeled them with the precision of a university professor. The horror was not just the violence, it was the calm. Mengele never raised his voice. He never showed anger. He worked with absolute silence and focus. Why did a trained doctor turn his back on the Hippocratic Oath? How did Nazi ideology transform medicine into a weapon of genocide? And most importantly, how did Josef Mengele vanish when the Third Reich collapsed? The answers lie in his escape from Europe to South America. The hunt for the Angel of Death was about to begin. January 1945, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The ground trembled under the weight of Soviet artillery. The Red Army was closing in. Josef Mengele watched the horizon and understood. The Nazi collapse was no longer a theory. It was an immediate reality. Mengele moved fast to erase his tracks. He didn't just leave. He gathered medical files, tossed archives into incinerators, and watched years of human experimentation turn to ash. Personal documents vanished into the flames. On January 17, 1945, he abandoned the camp. This was exactly 48 hours before Soviet troops broke through the perimeter. He fled west. Military records provide the details. Mengele discarded his SS uniform. He donned the standard gray of a common Wehrmacht soldier. It was a simple disguise. American forces captured him shortly after. They held him in a prisoner of war camp for several weeks. He sat among thousands of defeated men, but a critical error saved him. Why didn't the Americans identify the Angel of Death? At that moment, the Allied forces lacked a complete list of high-ranking war criminals. There was also a physical detail. Mengele lacked the standard SS blood type tattoo under his left arm. He had refused it years earlier out of vanity. Without the mark, he was just another soldier. The Americans opened the gates. Mengele was a free man. Between 1945 and 1949, he worked as a farmhand in Bavaria. He shoveled manure and tended to crops. Documents from the German Federal Archive reveal a stunning fact. He lived under his real name. He didn't hide behind a pseudonym. It was a mix of calculated arrogance and the total chaos of post-war Germany. The luck of the fugitive ran out in 1949. The Nuremberg trials were in full swing. Survivors were testifying. The world began to hear the horrific details of medical atrocities. Mengele saw his name in the headlines. Europe was no longer a sanctuary. He turned to the underground. A network known as Odessa provided the solution. These were the Ratlines. They were established escape routes designed to funnel SS officers to South America. Declassified British intelligence files track his movement. He obtained an international Red Cross passport. The name on the document was Helmut Gregor. In 1949, he reached the port of Genoa, Italy. He boarded a ship bound for Argentina. Buenos Aires welcomed him. The regime of Juan Perón saw German exiles as an asset. Thousands of Nazis had already settled there. The city felt like a second Berlin. Argentine records show a decade of comfort. By 1956, Mengele stopped using his alias. He walked the streets as Josef Mengele again. He worked for pharmaceutical companies owned by German immigrants. He drank coffee in German-run cafes. He wrote letters to his family in Germany. He felt untouchable. The audacity was total. One of the world's most wanted men lived a public life. But in 1960, the atmosphere changed. In May of that year, Mossad agents snatched Adolf Eichmann off a street in Buenos Aires. It was a surgical strike. The news hit the Nazi community like a physical blow. The footage from that era shows the panic. Every refugee in Argentina realized the truth. No one was safe. Israel's reach was global. How did Mengele react to Eichmann's capture? He didn't wait for a knock on the door. He packed his bags and disappeared into the shadows once more. Argentina was now a trap. He needed a new border. He looked toward the dense interior of Brazil. It would become his final hiding place. Decades of silence began in the Brazilian heartland. The hunt continued, but the trail went cold. Thus began the final chapter of the world's most elusive doctor. 1961. the Argentina-Paraguay border. Josef Mengele crossed the Parana River in a small wooden boat. He carried only one suitcase. Paraguay immigration records, later discovered by investigators, show his entry under the name Josef Mengele. It was a minimal change. This small detail demonstrated the total negligence of local authorities. Why did he choose Paraguay? At first glance, a safe haven, but in reality, it was a temporary trap. Fear dictated his every move. In Paraguay, Mengele tried to establish himself as a farmer. He bought land and equipment, but paranoia consumed him. He scanned every face and watched every car. Brazilian judicial documents reveal he soon sought a final refuge. He moved to Brazil in 1961. Through contacts in the German community, Mengele found shelter. Two families, the Stammers and the Bossards, took him in. The footage from the era shows the dense Atlantic forest. In the frame, remote farmhouses hidden by trees. Wolfgang Gerhardt, an Austrian living in Brazil, became his primary protector. Gerhardt was a Nazi sympathizer. The sound of a heavy door locking is audible. Brazilian federal police archives, opened after 1985, document his life. He spent nearly 2 decades on isolated farms in the Sao Paulo countryside. He used the name Wolfgang Gerhardt. The real Gerhardt had returned to Austria. He simply handed his identity papers to the fugitive. Mengele lived with extreme simplicity. He stayed in small rooms with bare concrete floors. He lived almost like a hermit. This was the statement Wolfram Bossert gave to police in 1985. The Bossarts met him in 1971. They sheltered him until his death. But his personality was a minefield. He had explosive temper tantrums. He suffered from constant crises of rage. Was he a broken man? At first glance, a lonely senior, but in reality, a defiant fanatic. Letters seized by the Brazilian police reveal his bitterness. In a 1977 letter to his son Rolf, he wrote, "I have lived more than half my life as a hunted man." He added that he felt no remorse. He claimed he did only what science and his country demanded. His son, Rolf Mengele, visited him secretly in Brazil that same year. Rolf traveled under a false name. He stayed in the small house. The camera records the cold reality of their meeting. In later interviews, Rolf described the encounter. He waited for a sign of regret. He looked for an admission of guilt. He found nothing. Mengele remained convinced he was a scientist doing his duty. The cognitive dissonance was absolute. He sat in his chair and defended the experiments. Events accelerated. During these years, Nazi hunting organizations intensified their efforts. Simon Wiesenthal maintained massive dossiers on Mengele. The files grew every month. Intelligence reports placed him in Paraguay, Chile, and Bolivia. These were false leads. The world looked everywhere except where he actually was. Mengele was living less than 100 kilometers from Sao Paulo. He walked the streets of Embu das Artes. He shopped in local markets. He watched the news of the search for him on a small television. Why did Brazil fail to find him? The government offered official cooperation, but on the ground, the fugitive remained invisible. The investigation stopped at the farm gates. The story reached its final chapter in 1979. War crime investigators spent decades searching. They found nothing. Who else knew he was there? How would his life end after 30 years in the shadows? February 7th, 1979, Bertioga Beach, Sao Paulo. The sun was high. The heat was intense. Josef Mengele was 67 years old. He arrived at the coast with Wolfram and Lieselotte Bossert. To the neighbors, he was just an elderly friend. To the world, he was a monster in hiding. The 1985 police inquiry reconstructs the final moments. The files contain every detail from the witnesses. According to the Bossarts, Mengele entered the water alone. He was a confident swimmer, but the ocean was aggressive that afternoon. Wolfram Bossert told police the current was too strong. 4:30 in the afternoon, Mengele was still in the water. Suddenly, his body went limp. Doctors later determined it was a massive stroke. The water filled his lungs. The Bossarts saw him struggling and rushed into the surf. They dragged his unconscious body across the sand. The footage of the location shows a wide, open beach. There were no vitals. His heart had stopped. This is where the cover-up began. The Bossards did not call for an ambulance immediately. They did not shout for a lifeguard. They stood over the body in silence. Every passing second was a risk to their secret. They feared one thing, the exposure of his true identity. They waited several minutes before seeking any help. They needed to ensure the story stayed straight. By the time authorities arrived, it was too late. The original death certificate tells a lie. It was issued by the Medical Legal Institute of Sao Paulo. The name on the paper, Wolfgang Gerhard. Nationality, Austrian. Age, 67. Cause of death, drowning. There was no mention of Auschwitz. There was no mention of the SS, February 10, 1979. The burial took place at the Embu das Artes cemetery. It was a cheap, simple grave, no monument, no real name. A Nazi criminal was buried under the identity of a friend. For 6 years, the secret held firm. The world continued the manhunt. Intelligence agencies spent millions tracking leads in the jungle. They were chasing a ghost. Why did the Bossards keep quiet for so long? Loyalty was one reason. Fear of prosecution was another. The investigation eventually hit a breakthrough. But for half a decade, the most wanted man in the world was just bones under a false name. The search continued while the target was already gone. 1985. They finally broke their silence. In later statements, the families claimed they acted out of fear. They feared reprisals. They feared legal complications. Lizzalotti stated they did not want to be accused of harboring a high-ranking criminal, but the window of protection was closing. International pressure on Brazil increased. The United States Department of Justice began to push for results. In Israel, the Mossad intensified its hunt for Nazi refugees across South America. The Brazilian Federal Police received the order to move. Police Chief Romeo Tuma led the operation. Officers raided properties linked to the Stammer and Bossard families. They seized documents and interrogated witnesses. On May 31, 1985, the Bossards confessed. Wolfgang Gerhard was a fake identity. The man was actually Josef Mengele. He had been dead for 6 years. He was buried in a small town called Embu das Artes. But words were not enough. How could they prove those bones belonged to the most wanted doctor in the world? There was a risk of a hoax. It could be an elaborate farce to end the manhunt forever. Investigators needed physical evidence. June 6, 1985, Embu das Artes Cemetery. Bright spotlights cut through the darkness. Television cameras from every major network recorded the scene. A forensic team composed of Brazilian, American, West German, and Israeli experts gathered at the grave. They began the exhumation of Wolfgang Gerhard. The chief medical examiner of the Sao Paulo FRML led the work. Official photographs document every movement of the shovels. The sound of metal hitting wood is audible. After removing the wet earth, they reached the coffin. The wood was deteriorated and rotting. The team opened the lid. The camera records, a complete skeleton lying inside. Despite the humid tropical climate, the bone preservation remained stable. The coroner noted this in his official report. The work was slow and methodical. They cataloged every bone and every anatomical detail. The preliminary anthropological analysis began. Every measurement had to be precise. There was no room for error. Events accelerated. If these bones didn't match the SS records, the hunt would continue. The world waited for the verdict.